pleasure to be here. My name is Chris Lee. I'm a principal of Syria Architects based in London. So I'll begin. So when we first started, the brief, which was prepared by Singapore's Housing and Development Board, or HDB as they call it, asked for the creation of a new typology, an integrated neighborhood center that will bring together communal amenities, shopping, and a polyclinic, sandwiched between an LRT station and a waterway. The focus of the brief, unlike other developer-driven commercial development, is that it should provide great public spaces to strengthen community bonding within the estate. Now, of course, in Kohlhaas's Harvard Guide to Shopping, he wrote that shopping is arguably the last remaining form of public activity. So although insightful in certain measures, I do think that there are other ways in which public activity can be nurtured. However, to date, the architecture of shopping in Singapore is this: a ubiquitous shopping mall, a superfluous monuments of consumption as public activity. Its role is to internalize all activities, drawing the lifeblood from the street and the city. And of course, polyclinics and hospitals, on the other hand, are this: often designed and built as independent buildings set away from other programs and resources associated with the urban realm. And the closest independent typology, the closest independent typology is the community center. Historically, is the town hall. Singapore, however, does not have this as a precedent. So the main challenge for this project is not only for us to bring together these three disparate programmatic components together in a new building typology, but it's also to harness an architectural grammar that will create meaningful communal spaces and to script a programmatic strategy that will foster a sense of belonging. So where do we look for precedent? So we thought that with more than 80% of Singaporeans living in public housing, which is remarkable, the architecture of Singapore's HDB has grown over the years that can be termed as a common architecture, an equalizing artifact that is able to accommodate the plurality of life. So this architecture of HDB, especially from the 70s and 80s, has this quality of an open framework, an unassuming structural expression of what it contains. And in fact, it can be argued that one of the most successful containers of social life in Singapore is the HDB void deck on the ground floor that you can find throughout the city. An open structure that is able to move from poetic emptiness in wait for social life to unfold, or to a space of celebration in union or in death. So in a way we can say that this is a space for everyone to be at ease. In other words, it's a form of architecture that can act as a common framework, a container of social life, a common architecture. So our approach was to draw from this precedent, the architecture of public housing for a mixed-use development. It's very unusual as an approach. So we wanted to create this new typology that suppresses the visual noise of shopping and the clinical architecture of hospital. Instead, the architecture must figure forth a communal space, first and foremost. So these communal spaces are expressed in three ways. The first is a large all-weather community event space, a sheltered plaza for the tropics. The second is a cascading communal garden, where communal horticulture activity can promote a sense of belonging to the place. And the third is a veranda space, spaces that allows program to spill out to the exterior, animating the facade of the building. This veranda also acts as an environmental buffer, cutting the rain and sun from direct contact with the skin of the building. So our first thought is that the neighborhood center should be conceived as a singular building that frames and cradles the garden. The garden fronts the waterways, creating a natural amphitheater towards the water's edge. And this garden cascades down the entire height of the building and draws programs and dining activities close to the water's edge. A gentle ramp provides easy access to all the gardens and terraces. They articulate the surface of the slope into several terraces. Plants define and shade each terrace. Every level of the neighborhood center and polyclinic has a direct view and access to the gardens. Shopping is visible, vibrant, and eating activities spill out onto the verandas, but they will never drown out the public realm. So the terraces are filled with outdoor communal spaces. Here is a play area fronting the pediatric unit. And as the garden matures today, the ramp now cuts across the terraces, and with each turn revealing different pockets of communal spaces, a hammock, a seat, a platform to stretch out, and so on. Upon reaching the roof, and then as one turns one's gaze onto the terraces, an enchanting views open up to the waterways and beyond. The terraces continues to the roof, where it is used as urban farms for community horticulture clubs and also for exercise areas for senior residents. Together, the communal spaces envelops the entire project and is accessible from the ground as well as all the way to the roof. Upon framing the cascading gardens, the second act of framing defines a sheltered community plaza. This volume is well defined, 4-story tall and sheltered from the elements. Pedestrian circulation is threaded through from all sides so that meaningful spaces can be defined for public use, spaces for pause, rest, and events. A generous public thoroughfare divides the scheme into the commercial as well as the polyclinic area. This pedestrian path links the neighborhood housing estates together and also draws pedestrian movement from the station and the road. The entrance is accentuated by just the slight angling of the facade facing the LRT station, creating a doorway into a triple volume entrance. Here, the funnel space that leads pedestrian onto the 4-story event space. This is strategically placed at the crossing of the waterways and the landing of the pedestrian bridge. This space is framed by a set of double columns, giving it an open facade with a plated grid of AB rhythm. When it rains or when the sun is at its most searing, blinds will drop to further shade this space. This deliberately porous facade both defines and allows permeation through its threshold. This porticoed entrance gives a sense of civic dignity as one passes through the space. As each floor is surrounded by open terraces with hanging gardens which overlook the communal gardens on the platform, they become a key feature of the elevation. The facade thus possesses a depth that overlays the vibrancy of the content and the nature that surrounds it. This depth also translates into veranda spaces for communal dining and for activities to spill out and enliven the facade of the building. Here, one can dine facing both the waterway and gardens and contribute to the vibrancy of the place. These verandas are also sheltered from rain by roller blinds, here when the blinds are fully drawn. The service facade is cladded with precast stained concrete and together with the double columns offers a rich and animated face to the building. So on a metacritical level, this project offered us an opportunity to think about architecture's wider role in conceiving and cultivating a sense of community. More often than not, architectures that are restrained, rational, and repetitive are derided for its lack of exuberance. But it's precisely these qualities that makes the architecture of public housing so familiar to Singaporeans, worthy of praise. We should understand that this architecture as a mute background that enables the color of life to flourish. And perhaps it's poignant today, after 60 years, the birth of Singapore is a very young nation, required a common narrative, and public housing actually was central to this effort. So similarly, the cultivation of a community and a sense of belonging requires a common framework. It is this very essence of a common architecture that we wanted to understand, to distill, and to revalidate. So I think we have done this in using a clear frame that creates a variety of communal spaces to unfold, the intimate scale of the veranda space, to the all-weather event space, a covered plaza for the tropics, and the cascading terraces that draws users from the water's edge all the way to the roof. It's actually unlike other commercial mixed-use development as it puts communal spaces first. And it draws on a modest but ultimately common architectural grammar that is the public housing of Singapore. Thanks.
Perhaps I will start with a question. Clearly, it's very expressive of its public quality. It is very social. It's very open. But I'd like to hear a bit from you about what makes this a 21st century building versus the Trebiation concrete frame and the traditional HDB type architectural expression.
Yeah, I think to begin with, I think it's the creation of a new typology. As you know, in most mixed-use development where shopping dominates, as I showed you in the earlier slides, they have a very particular architecture where shopping is the most visible and the most important element within it. So I think by reverting and revalidating a architecture that is familiar in HDB estates. 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing, which in the UK we call it social housing, in which UK struggles, for instance, with 15%. So I think that revalidation of architectural grammar that is familiar, that has been, in a sense, sanctioned and accepted through cultural and social acceptance, I think is a very important transition. So I think in that sense, it really suppresses and allows us to rethink about the typology of shopping. And of course, to bring shopping next to a polyclinic is also very, very unusual. I don't think I have ever seen that. So this bringing together of all amenities, shopping, polyclinic, there are some tuition centers and classrooms and eateries here, really is also a way in which we rethink community centers for a very high dense environment like Singapore. And also in terms of planning, the bringing together of these disparate elements is also to intensify land use in a land scarce city like Singapore. So if you see, for instance, hospitals is always placed elsewhere, shopping another place, and neighborhood center in another land. So by bringing them together, it also allows us to think about the way in which land scarce challenges can be addressed.
Go ahead.
When you showed the project, you showed us a lot of the outside and the entrance spaces. So in fact, exactly what you're talking about right now. It would be wonderful to get a sense of how shopping actually happens here.
Yes.
And how these juxtapositions actually take place.
Yes. To a certain degree, I think the architects sometimes have to relinquish control at certain places. So in terms of the shopping environment, the shopping here is, a lot of it is meant for small shops. So the design and the interior design and the fit out is left by others. So you could imagine there are small shops. And of course, there are also food courts within it. Yeah, I didn't show much because those were not within the scope of the design.
But when you showed the housing projects, a lot of the beauty came from the way that people have filled in the frame. And so it's a little disappointing not to see that or the polyclinic.
Yes.
I think, I just want to say I'm very happy when I used to be on the peer review committee of the URL, where we were arguing for having open floors and open spaces, and you seem to have done that well, but I'm just wondering also where it ends. The other prototype for this is the Star Shopping Mall, which has the large concert venue church on top of it, which seems to give it sort of a destination. Yeah. I'm just wondering where this all leads, and when you get to the roof, are you covered? How do you get up there?
So there are two questions there. So,
yeah,
so let me add
three questions.
Three questions. So it's universally accessible.
But what draws you up there? What's the destination up there?
It's horticulture clubs with urban farming at the top, and also exercise area for senior residents. I do not have the photos, but one of the most satisfying experience when I was visiting the building again was to actually see senior citizens with Zimmer frames actually traversing the ramps up to the roof. And precisely that when you make a public space, common space accessible and as a space of leisure and exercise, people do use it. So I think it's the project is universally accessible from all. Programs are placed precisely to make all visible and accessible surface of the building, 5 elevations, open to public. Now, with regards to the shops, of course, these pictures were taken when all the shops were not filled in yet, but it suffices to say that, as you know, in any shopping center, the shop's design is given to the owners of those little shops. So, yeah. And I think the other point that I think requires stressing here is that this is a project that is paid for by the state. So it's conceived and actually delivered on a very, very modest budget compared to other mixed-use development and shopping developments that has, if you notice, developer-driven, it's very high budget. Yeah.
So the state was the client. That's maybe an unusual question to ask about a design we see here, what I will ask you now, but I'm so interested in the process of how you came to the idea of implementing this hybrid project in a way. You know, how could you set up this dialogue with the client, the state, to get this through?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Ben. So I think it's also the way we do architecture in the office. Whichever city or context that we go to, we always try to draw lessons from what we call persistent architectures. That is to say that architecture has evolved through time in the city. And architectures that have evolved through time in the city is architecture that has been accepted by people in the city. And if they are familiar with that, and if they've accepted those architectures, something that is familiar to them, it is actually not too difficult convincing people, whether they are the clients or whether they're their users, because they see something very familiar with that.
I know, but can I think maybe to the, was the program like this when you started, or you changed with the client the program?
The program was given. The bringing together of these three almost sometimes irreconcilable programs, that was given. But the way in which...
The mixture, how you make this together?
Oh, that is our proposal. So the way in which we bring this program into what we call a common framework, that is our proposition.
Yeah, and this public space.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the ground floor.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much. And please welcome Katrine from ABB Bush Jaeger to co-present the trophy.